on News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
O'Connor and Company.
It is 5:06 on this Monday morning. Thanks for joining us here as we get your day launched the right way. Hope you had a great weekend, a beautiful weekend here in the nation's capital for the most part. A little rain here and there, but it's summertime. That happens. Coming up later this morning at 7:05, you bet we're going to hear from Joe DeGenova. There's plenty to talk to him about. It's 7:35. Stephen Kralbeck, and he's running for chair of Loudoun County Board of Supervisors, directly against our pals that like to take tax dollars and fly off to Ghana. And then at 8:35, Hung Kao, speaking of Loudoun County, but he's got his sights set on the entire Commonwealth as he's running for the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate, and he will join us then. And also, speaking of Virginia Republicans, in this morning for a vacation, Julie Gunn, this is Mercedes Schlapp, back from your own vacation. Welcome back, Mercedes.
Oh, why am I not lying on the beach? What's going on here? I'm stuck with you all morning, Larry. Come on.
You know what? Doing radio with me is like being on a tropical beach. Come on.
Oh, yes.
Like a vacation.
Where's the pina colada? Come on.
Well, I did. Listen, this is summertime, so a lot of us are taking vacations on various days, and you were gone for a couple of weeks. You're back now. But while you were gone, boy, did you miss out. Look at that. They indicted your old boss, Donald Trump, again.
And guess what? His poll numbers keep going up and up and up, Larry. No, can I tell you something? Every time Matt and I, this is why we really never take a vacation, because every time we're going to go on vacation, there's a major news story. So last summer, we take our vacation with our kids, and then all of a sudden, what happens? The FBI raid of Donald Trump's home. So before
Mar-a-Lago,
you know it, we're back at work. Yes, we're back at work, getting a statement out, doing press. We did the same thing. So now I just plan. I take my computer, and we just do our hits, and I just tell Matt, listen, we just got to hone in, get work done, and then you can relax for a couple hours.
Sure to get now on Newsmax, direct from the Tiki Bar.
Exactly. Right.
You've got a little drink with an umbrella sticking out of it.
We can't, no. No way. The news is so disturbing right now with everything that's happening, especially, with what we've seen with Donald Trump and this indictment, Larry. It's just been... it's just one of these things that it aggravates you, because you're like, how can the Department of Justice be so just biased and targeting Republicans? Their obsession with Donald Trump is outrageous. I mean, it's just over the top.
And it just doesn't help. It's if they're trying to hurt him politically, it doesn't work. No. So what are they trying to do? I don't think it's administer justice, because sadly we have, from Andrew McCarthy to Joe DeGenova to Matt Whitaker to all of these, attorneys who look at this and say, I wouldn't bring these charges, and you would think that if you're bringing federal charges against the leading political opponent of the current president, which is 100% unprecedented, then you'd think that that would be a slam dunk case, that the majority of Americans will look at it and say, well, yeah, you got to indict the guy. But it's quite the opposite. Right. And so why would you bring charges knowing that most Americans, literally the majority of Americans right now, believe that these charges are politically motivated? That is toxic to our system.
Well, and then when you have the fact that Jack Smith, the special counsel, he doesn't even include the peaceful rhetoric that President Trump said on January 6th into the indictment. And it shows when you find some of these critics of President Trump looking at this indictment saying, wait a second here, this is really could be dangerous for our First Amendment.
Of course.
Because the president can't have an opinion on whether you agree with him or not on the election, number one. Number two, you've had Democrat after Democrat after Democrat say, when Bush was elected, that election was fraud. You had the fact that they argued that the voting machines had been tampered with. You go back into the rhetoric of the Democrats talking about 2000, 2000,
2004, 2016.
Yeah, you go through the list. Every time there was a Republican, you had Democrats making an argument as to why that election wasn't valid.
Right.
What I'm worried about, can I tell you what I'm worried about? I'm worried about the fact, and you've traveled a lot in the country as well, but that, when I talk to voters, I always the election integrity piece is critical. And I'm so concerned Americans are losing faith in their election system. And that is where I think that you have to find common ground between the Democrats and Republicans in terms of ensuring there's election integrity and that both parties feel comfortable with.
Yeah, and I get the feeling with these indictments that the message from the federal government is, when we say somebody won the election, you accept it or else we'll throw you in jail. It's like, that's not how you instill confidence in the electorate. That's not how a citizen is convinced to believe that our voting integrity is actually in place and intact by criminalizing wrongthink, which is exactly what they're doing. And by the way, Mercy, you said they're criminalizing the president having an opinion. And it's actually even worse than that. They're criminalizing his advisors giving him legal advice. John Eastman, one of the unindicted co-conspirators here, is identified as attorney number 2. And they cite him saying, well, yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff is untested in the Constitution. There are provisions to question these ballots. There are provisions to get different electors. That's happened before. In 1960 it happened. It's like, this is a constitutional scholar giving his advice. You may think his advice is wrong, but a lawyer giving a client advice is not illegal. It certainly shouldn't be in the United States of America.
Yeah. No, it's very problematic. And I think when you look at the fact that the trial is set here in Washington, the judge is known as being the most aggressive judge that we've seen on J6 defendants. And then on top of that, you have a jury pool that's there's no way. I mean, in D.C., it's 95% that did not support Donald Trump. It just there's nothing fair about this process, and the indictment's a joke. And you get to the point that it is where the Democrats have been headed. They want to put this man in jail. This is unacceptable when it comes to the election interference of trying to put in jail your political opponent. And it's just I think is causing huge havoc in this election process right now, as Joe Biden is literally like taking a nap and snoozing on the beach. You know,
well, they're trying to repeat. They can't come up with a virus. They can't come up with a lockdown.
Yeah.
They can't come up with a global pandemic. They could. They did last time, but they can't do that. So now they're like, okay, instead of a pandemic, let's just throw over 100 felony charges at Donald Trump, and that's all we need to do to tarnish him and slime him and drag him. But I don't think that's working.
Larry,
Mercy.
You're missing something. No, you're missing something for the election. The UFOs. Are you kidding me? I've read more stories on vacation about the UFOs than anything else. Okay, like they keep saying there are sightings, and then one person said that the UFOs almost caused World War III. Thank God that Donald Trump is saying that he would make sure we don't stop World War III, because what's the fight going to be between the aliens and Donald Trump? I mean, seriously, I can't go on vacation anymore. It's stressing me out to go on vacation.
You've been away, and I forgive you for not listening, but trust me, we've been all over the UFOs. We did not miss it, nor the cocaine sharks. We were on that, too. All right. So in a moment, Mercy just said there's no way that Donald Trump can get a fair trial in D.C. And, well, Donald Trump agrees. He said so on social media, and there's many indications that he's absolutely accurate. We'll give you those details and a lot more on this in just a moment, because maybe you were on vacation last week, too, and just like Mercedes. So we got to get her up to speed and ready to go to fight these fights. So keep it here.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live
from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Need a new roof? Honor, respect, and trust your home with Valor. Visit valorhome.com.
Donald J. Trump on his social media platform Truth Social says, in all capital letters, I'll have you know, there is no way I can get a fair trial with the judge assigned, in quotation marks, to the ridiculous freedom of speech fair elections case. Everybody knows this, and so does she. We will be immediately asking for a recusal of this judge on very powerful grounds, and likewise for venue change out of D.C. Both need to happen. Certainly the venue change at the very least, as you mentioned. Mercedes, 95% of the electorate in Washington, D.C. voted against Donald Trump. That was the jury pool that brought these indictments, and it's certainly the jury pool that will be utilized to judge him. That is not a fair and impartial jury of his peers. That's the whole reason for venue changes, and it should absolutely happen.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be interesting to see if he's able, if they grant that motion. There's a sense that they won't grant the motion. I think the great Mark Levin said it perfectly, where he should, the president's team should move forward with like an emergency motion to move this to the Supreme Court, have them listen in the Supreme Court, because, take the case in the Supreme Court level, because that, we saw this with Governor Bob McDonnell.
That's right.
Let's go back. Like that special counsel, Jack Smith, he was very aggressive against former Virginia Governor McDonnell. The case, when it was dismissed, when it got to the Supreme Court, because it just shows that Jack Smith is all about this targeting on the political side, and
right.
I think it's destructive.
We had former Governor McDonnell on the show last week to talk about that, and everyone should grab that podcast if you missed it, wherever you get your podcast. But he absolutely agreed. Yeah, let's not forget, Jack Smith's prosecution of Bob McDonnell was overturned unanimously. Ruth Bader Ginsburg agreed that it was an atrocious miscarriage of justice. The problem is, that process, as Mark Levin points out, takes 3-4 years to get to.
It does. Yeah.
Bob McDonnell's reputation was slimed. His political career was ruined because that was the goal. The goal was not to get a good prosecution. Jack Smith didn't care about following the law and getting it right. Obviously, if the Supreme Court overturned it because he didn't follow proper procedures, he didn't care. His job was to end McDonnell's career, and that's what they're trying to do here. And let's talk about this judge. Julie Kelly obviously covers everything having to do with the convictions and trials of those wrapped up in the January 6th fiasco. Well, here's a statement that this judge said in a ruling denying Trump executive privilege protections from the House Democrats during the January 6th committee hearing. See, the January 6th committee, they were trying to get a bunch of documents and a bunch of speeches, a bunch of testimony from people who worked with the president. And they were claiming executive privilege because he was the president of the United States at the time. He should have executive privilege. Yeah. Well, here's the opinion from this judge. Let me quote it. This unprecedented attempt to prevent the lawful, referring to January 6th, this unprecedented attempt to prevent the lawful transfer of power from one administration to the next caused property damage, injuries, and death, and for the first time since the election of 1860, the transfer of executive power was distinctly not peaceful. 1860, that's a reference to the Civil War. That's the judge we're talking about. Obviously, she has predisposed opinions about Donald Trump's actions and words leading up to January 6th, which is exactly what she's supposed to be ruling on, Mercedes.
Right.
In her own words, she has proven that she can't be impartial in this.
Yeah. No, I think for most of us watching this, when you see the aggressive prosecutor in New York, the district attorney brags to then now this judge, there's such a trend as to how these indictments are being introduced and handled. And let me tell you, for President Trump, when you look at the timeline between what he needs to be doing from a campaign perspective to having to show up at court, what's happening is that him showing up at court is actually making the base unified, fired up, and ready to support him. And so it leaves no oxygen in the room for the other Republican candidates who are trying to compete against Donald Trump. Yeah,
let's get into that part of it in a moment. Again, listen, we've got plenty to talk about, you and I, about the Republican primaries, where it stands, what's going on with DeSantis, what's going on with Vivek Ramaswamy, who's really sort of rising right now as we lead up to the debate scheduled for August 23rd and whether Donald Trump will even participate. But in a moment, I want to ask you specifically about this, about these charges and the charges hanging over Donald Trump. How do these other candidates maneuver this environment? We'll ask Mercedes Schlapp that in just a moment. There's more to come. Right now, it's 5:21. As I mentioned, I wanted to ask Mercedes about how the other candidates deal with the not only attention that Donald Trump is getting with all these indictments, but also how to sort of be on his side, but at the same time make the case for your own candidacy. I think it's fair to say that how Mike Pence has handled this is probably not the best way to win the Republican nomination, Mercedes. No, not at all. I think there was like a Babylon Bee that I saw that was kind of one of the ways, and I should look it up, but it's that Mike Pence, one way to lose like 80 million votes is by, doing what he's done, basically. Yeah. But we'll get the right Chiron there. But literally, Pence, I think what's really hard, first of all, Pence is running to be the like Chris Christie, to be the
critic of Donald Trump, right? Like, there's no way Pence can win. He barely is polling at like 2, 3, 4%,
I think he's running to be a board member of American Enterprise Institute, honestly.
Well, then he doesn't need to run to do that and waste millions of dollars running.
Well, no, this cleanses him of his Trumpiness.
Oh, please. He basically says you put the Constitution ahead of yourself, and here's the deal. The reality is the target needs to be Joe Biden. He is not putting the Constitution ahead and the DOJ ahead of himself, right? So that's really the target. And I think that these candidates who are really critical of Donald Trump, there's no way they're going to attract these MAGA supporters. They tried with Ron DeSantis, and you look at Ron DeSantis, and he's crumbling. He's like there's events happening in Iowa where people aren't showing up. He's too aggressive against Donald Trump and his policies, and the MAGA people are saying no, thank you. Like President Trump did a good job for 4 years. No need to go after his policies.
Right. And you can even, unlike what Pence is doing, you can say, I didn't like what happened on January 6th, and I don't think the president was good, but it's certainly not criminal. This is outrageous, and then focus it back on Biden.
Exactly.
Well, there's more to come. And Joe DeGenova joins us at 7 o'clock.
04 or go to ericstewartgroup.com. That's ericstewartgroup.com.
Now
on News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 5:37 on this Monday morning. Coming up at 7:05, Joe DeGenova joins us. 7:35, Stephen Carbelk is running for Loudoun County Board of Supervisors. 8:35, Hung Cao running for the Senate in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Hung Cao could be your next senator there, Mercedes Schlepp. Thanks for being here this morning.
Well, it's going to be an interesting primary, to say the least, but I don't know. It's such a hard state to run. We shouldn't say that. Glenn Youngkin won. He's a great governor, so we could win.
The tide is turning in Virginia.
I hope you're right. I hope
it is.
You're right.
I know. See, you're right there in the mean streets of Alexandria. It doesn't seem that way on a daily basis.
Oh, no, but we get out to Madison County and the beautiful parts of Virginia.
It's amazing when you start driving downstate in Virginia and you get about 20 miles away from D.C. and it looks very, very different, doesn't it?
It's completely. Yeah. The key will be, obviously, with the Senate. The senators are they try to play these, Warner and Kaine. They try to play this moderate Democrat role.
I don't think you can't fool us anymore.
You can't fake it anymore.
Nope.
Can't fake it
Kaine
anymore.
Certainly can't. Listen, we love drawing on your expertise about you've worked on campaigns. You get it. You understand, especially Virginia politics. I love drawing on your expertise based on being in the room, specifically in the comms department at the White House, because this story, we've been covering it, the fact that the White House press office has now dumped 31% of the reporters who used to have access to the executive office building, to the briefing room, to the White House. These are called hard passes.
Right.
As of July 31st, they have dropped 31% of the people in the press corps that have those passes. That's 442 fewer reporters to cover this White House. And it'll be no surprise to any of us that a vast majority of those reporters are right-of-center outlets, like, as Rob Bluey points out, he's the editor-in-chief of Daily Signal at Heritage Foundation, like his organization and others. This is Karine Jean-Pierre and the press office and the comms department of the Biden administration trying to sort of put a stranglehold on who gets information from this White House. And if you're not nice to them, then you're out. Boy, wouldn't it have been great, Mercy, when you were in the comms department there, if you could do something like that?
Well, I got to tell you, I know when we were reading the story, I was telling you and Heather, I was going, oh my goodness. I mean, this was a topic that would come up all the time.
Tell everyone what you told us.
Well, it would come up all the time when we were, speaking with the president, and he would look at us and be like, can we do anything to make sure these reporters, don't get a pass? And it was always trying to figure out, what do you do? Now, remember, during the Trump time, there were so many hostile, they're not even reporters. I mean, they're like Democrat activists who hated President Trump, who would do everything they could to be awfully rude to not only Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was a press secretary at the time, but, just in dealing with the president. So the president said, maybe we should move the, the press briefing room over to another building, to the old executive office building. I mean, we were coming up with, what do we do, to deal with these reporters?
By the way, why isn't that why couldn't you do that? There's nothing in the Constitution or in any sort of federal statute that says that the briefing room has to be in the West Wing. Why not move it across the street?
Well, it's very, mind you, the West Wing, it's so tiny. It's such a tiny space, even for the reporters there. But it would be nice to move them to a new location that wouldn't be right in the West Wing. I mean, I'd be completely open to that, especially considering that the space is so tight. But now that Karine Jean-Pierre, literally, they've taken out 443 hard passes, they're going to have plenty of room in the press briefing area. I mean, it's outrageous. We literally suspended, I think it was Jim Acosta from CNN, for a week.
Because he manhandled an intern.
And here you have the White House taking aggressive actions as to what press credentials you're going to get if you're going to get the hard pass. Now, I'm assuming that
you suspend. Hold on, I don't want to lose sight of this. You suspended Jim Acosta for a week because he grabbed the wrist of an intern during a press conference in the East Room.
I remember that.
Which, by the way,
you're right.
When was the last time Joe Biden had a press conference? For crying out loud.
Point.
Jim Acosta gets all aggressive with this intern because he's not being able to grandstand long enough in front of Trump during the East Room press conference. You guys suspend his credentials for a week, and everyone acts like you're taking a blowtorch to the First Amendment. Here we've got the Biden White House basically completely suspending permanently over 400 reporters. And have you heard anything about it? Anything at all?
Not at all. Not until you brought it up.
Nothing.
But, no, it's... So I'd be curious to see why they're making what they're considering "quote unquote" news versus not news. Like, I know Simon Atiba, the White House correspondent for Today News Africa, he lost his hard pass, and they're saying that 441 reporters are no longer going to be able to attend the White House press briefing.
Right.
Or access the Pennsylvania Avenue campus unless they obtain what is called a temporary day pass, which means you have to call the press office.
Right.
It's actually going to be more
whole
work.
Rigmarole.
Yeah, call the press office, give your social security number, your date of birth, and then have them go through the process. But it's kind of crazy that they're doing this.
Oh, and if they claim, these people from the Daily Signal, they're advocates or whatever. Let me just be clear, activists. Let me be clear. First of all, it's called an adversarial press. Okay, I'm sorry. Deal with people who disagree with you, asking you questions. Otherwise, as long as April Ryan has a hard pass, forget about it. You can't stand up and tell me we've only cut out activists.
They probably will make sure that the first 3 or 4 rows will be all friendly Biden reporters.
Well, I mean, they have already done that.
Well, they're going to ask. Literally, the one thing I was watching last week was the president was on taking his vacation on the beach, and it was you would hear, this is like these reporters. They'd be like, he just came out of watching Oppenheimer, the movie Oppenheimer. He just was on a bike ride. I was like, are you kidding me? In a major news week, and the president's watching a movie. And
that's the kind of reporting you're going to get now. Congratulations.
Yep,
it's
right.
Almost like President Stalin is really going to be set up for his second term. Oh, I'm sorry, Biden. It's 5:44. Well, when Joe Biden was running for president, you remember that from his basement, Mercedes? He claimed that we need to regain our stature in the world, that we wanted other countries to respect us. He would bring people together. Well, I guess this is what he meant. He's brought our enemies together. Russia and China are doing joint military operations, and 11 of their ships were spotted near the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. That would be U.S. territory. And some of the ships actually ventured right up to the brink of that territory. Why would Russia and China be doing joint naval operations right off the American coast? The U.S., by the way, has dispatched 4 U.S. destroyers to sort of send a signal to those ships that they're getting a little too close. But boy, things sure have taken a turn in terms of our national security and international stature here in 3 short years.
Yeah, I read, this is a story I read last night. I read it. I couldn't believe it. I just was like, Matt, did you hear, you have these Russian and Chinese ships off the coast of Alaska. Mm-hmm. I mean, it truly, and if you watch, and I know Gordon Chang, he's a regular on the show, a China expert. Yeah. He has been beating this drum for a long time, which is that China is preparing for war, that China is looking, that they're getting aggressive. Obviously, they have no fear by having this relationship with Russia and having this threat against the United States. I just find this to be very disturbing, and the biggest concern being that I think they mentioned there it's a historic first, and there's this Brent Sadler, who, a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, He's a retired
Navy captain.
Yeah. Given the context of the war in Ukraine and tensions around Taiwan, this move is highly provocative. And look, if the Chinese were able to dispatch their spy balloon over the United States, gather a bunch of intel information, there's been word that they can hack into our military operations. These are big warning signs. Is the United States ready? Is this military ready? Is the Biden administration ready to push back against the Chinese and say, listen, we don't want to start a war, but you guys have to back off. And I just think that we're in a very, very delicate situation right now.
We are. And by the way, Mercedes, you're right to throw the context of the Ukrainian war, as well as threats and incursions and rhetoric and saber rattling toward our ally Taiwan. But then add to that, last week, 2 U.S. Navy sailors, out in San Diego were arrested for spying on the United States on behalf of China. And listen, I know that the big headline there is we've got 2 sailors spying. Yes, that's awful. But let's not lose sight of the fact that they were doing it for China. China asked them to do it. China is our enemy. That you don't spy on your friends.
Well, and the other piece of this that Gordon has mentioned is how many Chinese nationals are coming in through the border and coming into the United States. Another big question. You don't see the Biden administration addressing these issues in a way that makes you feel confident that we're in a good shape to deal with this.
In fact, they're doing quite the opposite, if I may, Mercy. My friend John Hassan, a colleague over at Town Hall, wrote an article about this. Listen to this timeline. November of 2022, 9 months ago, 10 months ago, Joe Biden made a public address where he promised that he had no intention and did not want to start a new Cold War with China. We don't want a Cold War with China. Here's what happened since then. April, Russian spy balloon over the U.S. In April, Chinese. In April, a Chinese police station operating illegally, their own private little police station operating in New York City. In June, the Chinese Communist Party plans to build a spy base in Cuba, just 90 miles off of Florida. Yeah. July, Chinese Communist Party, we found a biolab in Fresno, California, where 1,000 mice were found infected with COVID and other horrific diseases. And then just last week, the sailors are caught spying for the CCP. And then over the weekend, Chinese ships with Russia off the Aleutian Islands. The second Biden announces, we don't want any trouble with China, China's making trouble with us.
Right.
And we have no response.
He's snoozing. Look, Joe Biden's snoozing on the beach, Rehoboth Beach. I mean, it's an embarrassment. I do, you did mention the story about the 2 U.S. Navy sailors accused of passing these secrets to China. Let's remember, they allegedly sent a blueprint for a radar system, technical manuals for vessels, operational plans for military exercises in the Indo-Pacific, and details of defensive weapons to Chinese intelligence officers. Seriously.
Yeah.
This is talk about so problematic.
They're at war with us.
They're at war with us.
Here's the thing, Mercedes. This is the kind of thing that happened during the Cold War. The Soviet Union would do this all the time, right? And they recruited spies. They recruited Robert Hassan and the FBI. They recruited from the CIA. I forget his name now. The spy from the CIA.
The spy for the CIA.
No, he was spying for the Soviets. Oh gosh, why is his name off the tip of my head?
You're gonna have to
they would be spying on us all the time.
Yeah.
Aldrich James.
Look at you. You're amazing how you remember these things.
I didn't remember it there. It took me 20 seconds. But the problem is, it was the Cold War. The Soviets are spying on us all the time. Tom Clancy stuff, right? All these. The difference is, while they were doing that, we weren't manufacturing iPhones in Moscow.
Yeah.
We weren't making all of our textiles in Siberia.
Well, and
we weren't thinking that they were a partner of ours because we recognized they were an enemy, and we treated them that way. But we're still pretending like we can be trade partners with China.
And how dependent are we on China? That, for example, some of the things that you need for your Tesla, right? you have to get it from China.
Well, yes, thank you for singling out my electric car, but just so you know, your very fancy and overpriced SUV also requires chips from China, too.
We're selling the SUV.
And China has made us dependent on them.
That is right.
And we have willingly gone along. And now they are obviously our military as well as our espionage enemy. Hold that thought. Coming up later this program, we've got Hung Cao, who is a veteran of the United States Navy and running for Senate, and he knows a lot about this. He'll join us at 8:35. Right now it's 5:53.